So, let's just jump right in. I've got a question for you. How did a paranoid, pulp sci-fi writer who is barely making rent become the uncanny prophet of our 21st century lives? Today, we're unpacking the strange, brilliant, and honestly, often terrifying world of Philip K. Dick, a man who, it seems, saw our future long before we ever did.
In this quote, this is everything. This is the key to his entire universe. For him, this wasn't just some, fun thought experiment. It was a kind of frantic, hysterical vision. This wasn't a game. For Dick, the aliens were always just around the corner, and the very fabric of reality was always about to completely unravel.
So here's the central puzzle of Philip K. Dick, right? In his lifetime, he was a struggling sci-fi author living in near poverty. Get this, when he died in 1982, he had exactly one book still in print. Just one. But after his death, bam, he becomes one of America's most influential writers, the guy who inspired massive Hollywood blockbusters, and he was the first science fiction author to be honored in the Library of America. I mean, how on earth did that happen?
Well, to understand that incredible turnaround, we first have to get into his head. We have to understand the source of his power, a uniquely prescient and deeply felt paranoia.
And what's so great is that PKD himself basically gave us the roadmap to his own work. He tells us right here, everything he ever wrote, and I mean everything, boils down to these two obsessive questions. 1, what is real? And 2, what does it actually mean to be human? These weren't just philosophical ideas for him, they were the engine driving all of his fiction.
So let's start with that first great obsession, the slippery, fragile nature of reality itself. For Dick, the world we see isn't necessarily the world that's really there. His characters are constantly finding out that their lives, their memories, their whole societies are just elaborate fakes, put together by massive corporations, shadowy governments, or maybe even alien forces.
This brings us to a really core concept he loved to play with, the simulacrum. Now, it's not just a copy. It's a copy of something that maybe never even existed in the first place. Think of it like this. An electric sheep designed to replace a real one that went extinct, or a TV host who's completely virtual. His worlds are just full of these things.
And the wild part is, he didn't have to look very far for inspiration. He saw this unreality, this fakeness, growing all around him in the suburbs of Orange County. This quote from A Scanner Darkly is just perfect. It shows how he saw this repetitive, commercialized landscape as a kind of living simulacrum, a life that was just one big commercial for itself.
Okay, so let's move on to his second obsession, because this is where it gets even more personal. Trying to define humanity in an age where technology was making that definition harder and harder to pin down.
I mean, you can just feel the personal anguish in this quote, right? This wasn't just a fun sci-fi idea for him. The question of what's authentic was deeply, deeply personal. Because think about it. If you can't tell what's real around you, how could you ever know if you are real?
And to really dig into this question, he populated his stories with this whole universe of beings that just blurred all the lines. You had androids who made you wonder if empathy could be programmed. You had mutants and psychics who were pushing the boundaries of what a human could be. By putting these others at the center, he forces us to ask, what, if anything, really makes us special? They weren't just characters, they were walking, talking philosophical problems.
So here's the really crucial point. He took the classic Turing test, the test to see if a machine can pass for a human, and he basically made it irrelevant. In his worlds, the big question isn't whether an android can be authentic, it's whether anyone can.
Okay, so we've got his core themes down. Now let's connect them to today, because this is where his far-out ideas start to feel less like fiction and a lot more like a documentary of our own lives.
So get this, decades before the internet, decades before we worried about algorithms, Dick saw mass media as this powerful tool of control. He called it soft totalitarianism. He imagined a world where a TV celebrity, basically a talking head with no real opinions, could make an entire culture think and feel the same way. Sound at all familiar?
But his vision of a world just completely saturated by human-made stuff didn't stop with the media. No, it extended to ecology itself. Decades before we even had a name for it, Philip K. Dick was writing fiction about the Anthropocene, this era where we humans have fundamentally and permanently changed the planet.
He asked this profoundly strange and, it turns out, really relevant question. What happens when our own actions transform Earth so much that we don't really belong here anymore?
So in his post-apocalyptic worlds, Earth wasn't just a dead wasteland. Oh no, it was often teeming with new, strange life that crawled out of nuclear fallout or some technological disaster. The planet hadn't just died, it had mutated into something else entirely. And this led to this totally radical idea. In these new ecologies, the mutated or artificial creatures, they were the new native species, and the original unmodified humans, they were the aliens, the visitors, needing a spacesuit just to walk on the surface of their own planet.
Which brings us right back to our original mystery. Why did this obscure writer suddenly become so incredibly important after he was gone? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. The world we live in changed into something he had already dreamed up. His real legacy isn't about predicting flying cars or video phones. It's that he gave us the philosophical tools, the vocabulary of paranoia, of simulacra, of artificial people, to make sense of a world where reality itself feels increasingly shaky. And you can just watch this legacy explode after his death. It's like a dam breaking. Just a few months after he died, Blade Runner hits theaters. Then you get Total Recall, Minority Report, A Scanner Darkly. His work was suddenly everywhere because his questions had become everyone's questions. And he's more relevant now than ever. I mean, scholars are still grappling with his work, constantly finding new ways his paranoid visions speak directly to our here and now, from our surveillance culture to our fragile ecosystems. This is probably his most famous definition of reality. It's that stubborn thing that just pushes back, that persists even when all our illusions and all our constructs just fall apart. It was the one thing he was always desperately searching for.
But maybe he left us with an even bigger question. In our world of deep fakes, of virtual realities, of AI that can feel more human than some people, his original question, what is real, has started to evolve. Today, in a world Philip K. Dick would have recognized instantly, we might have to ask ourselves something else entirely. Does it even matter?
Philip K. Dick. You know the name, the absolute legend of sci-fi, whose novels just completely twisted reality and, let's be honest, changed the game forever. And you might think you know the maze of his mind, but today, well, today we're going to explore a hidden path, a secret influence that might just reframe everything you thought you knew. All right, so if you've ever really dived into PKD's world, you've definitely come across Gnosticism. It's kind of his signature thing, right? The idea that our world is basically a cosmic prison, this flawed knockoff made by some lesser god, and that we need this secret knowledge, this gnosis, to break out. I mean, it's woven into almost all of his work. But here's the kicker. What if that whole Gnostic framework, as central as it is only one piece of the puzzle? What if it's just one branch on what Dick himself called the tree of gnosis? What if there's this other, huge branch that almost nobody talks about? And this is where we find it. This is where we uncover that other branch, this hidden world of Hermeticism and alchemy. And trust me, it is the absolute key to unlocking PKD's later and maybe his most profound work. So, first things first, what in the world is Hermeticism? Well, it's this ancient tradition that has a totally different take on reality. Instead of seeing the world as a jail you have to escape, Hermetic thinkers see it as, well, as a divine book, a complex puzzle, maybe even an engine built by the real God. The goal isn't to escape, it's to understand, to decipher it. And this slide just nails the difference, doesn't it? Gnosticism basically says the world is fundamentally wrong. A mistake. But Hermeticism says the world is fundamentally meaningful. Now, for a writer like Philip K. Dick, who was obsessed with finding hidden patterns and secret messages in reality, you can see how this Hermetic idea of the world as a text would be just incredibly compelling. And to really get how deep this influence went, we've got to look at the specific thinkers PKD was studying. He was almost obsessively writing about them in his private journals, The Exegesis. And these weren't just dusty historical figures to him. Oh no, they were his crew, his comrades in heresy. First up is the Italian philosopher, astronomer, and mystic Giordano Bruno, a true Renaissance rebel if there ever was one. This guy was actually burned at the stake for his beliefs, and what were they? Well, things like an infinite universe with countless other worlds. Sound familiar to any sci-fi fans out there? Bruno didn't see people as trapped souls. He saw us as beings capable of reaching a divine understanding of this huge, magical cosmos. It is no wonder PKD was so drawn to his rebellious spirit. And look, we don't even have to guess. In his own private writing, Dick is crystal clear. He flat out calls Bruno my main man. This wasn't some casual interest for him. This was a core inspiration. All right, next up in PKD's personal pantheon of heroes is Paracelsus, a totally fascinating figure who was basically standing with one foot in science and the other in magic. So he was this revolutionary doctor, a pioneer in pharmacology, but his whole worldview was deeply alchemical. He lived by the principle of as above, so below. The idea that the human body, the microcosm, is a perfect reflection of the entire universe, the macrocosm. You know, this idea that the inner world of our minds is connected to the outer world of the cosmos. For a writer like PKD, that was pure gold.
And the third key player in this alchemical trio is the German mystic Jacob Boehm.
Boehm had this incredible vision of the universe, not as some static, finished thing, but as a dynamic, constantly evolving alchemical engine. A place where God, or divinity, is always in the process of becoming something new. This idea of a living, processing reality, it fed directly into Dick's own incredibly complex and always shifting thoughts about the universe. So you might be thinking, how on earth did these centuries-old ideas get to a science fiction writer living in California? Well, they were passed down through this really fascinating chain of 20th century scholars, psychologists, and even counterculture figures who brought these forgotten traditions back to life. And this chart just connects all the dots perfectly. You start with the historian Francis Yates, who pretty much rediscovered the entire Hermetic tradition for the modern world, making guys like Bruno accessible again. Then you've got the psychologist Carl Jung, who did something amazing. He reread alchemy not as a literal quest for gold, but as this powerful metaphor for psychological growth, for becoming a whole person. And these ideas then seep into the counterculture through people like Terence McKenna, and are explored by scholars like J. Kinney. It's a direct line of thought, stretching from the Renaissance right onto Philip K. Dick's bookshelf.
Okay, so when you put all these pieces together, the Gnosticism everyone knows about and this hidden Hermeticism, what do you actually get? What was the final shape of Philip K. Dick's strange, beautiful, and complicated worldview?
He actually tells us himself, it wasn't just one thing. It was this unique synthesis, this three-part blend he created. He took Gnosticism and Hermeticism and mixed them with another ancient philosophy, Neoplatonism, which sees all of reality as flowing from a single perfect source, kind of like light shining out from the sun. And this is the absolute key. Right there, in his own words from his own private journals, Dick defines his own spiritual system. It was a hybrid faith. He took that Gnostic suspicion that something is wrong with reality, and he combined it with the Hermetic belief that reality is a divine puzzle that just maybe we can actually solve. You know, this synthesis is so unique and so powerful that J. Kinney, who's one of the top scholars of the exegesis, has actually suggested that Dick's writings contain the seeds of a whole new spiritual path. He floated the idea that a Pkdlm religion might arise. And that leaves us with one last big question, doesn't it? When we really look at this whole complex web of thought, Gnostic, Hermetic, alchemical, we have to ask ourselves, was Philip K. Dick just a novelist playing with some weird ideas? Or was he a modern-day heretic, following in the footsteps of his heroes like Bruno? Or was he maybe something more? The accidental prophet of a new way to see our strange, puzzling, and maybe, just maybe, divine reality. The text, it seems, is still there, waiting for us to decipher it.
You know films like Blade Runner or Minority Report, right? Well, if you do, then you've already stepped into the mind of Philip K. Dick. This was a writer who was completely obsessed with one absolutely terrifying question. What is real? We're about to dive into the strange and brilliant universe of one of science fiction's most important voices.
So for this deep dive, our guide is going to be Kim Stanley Robinson's incredible study, The Novels of Philip K. Dick. It really gives us this perfect lens to see exactly how this struggling writer managed to completely rewire an entire literary genre.
Okay, so let's just start with the big one. What if your entire world was a lie? I mean, really think about that. This is the question that just haunted Philip K. Dick, and it became the engine for pretty much everything he ever wrote. It's the kind of thing that makes you look around and wonder, what if all this, everything I take for granted, is just a construct? All right, Section 1,
Two worlds, one writer. So to really get a handle on Dick's genius, you first have to understand this massive creative conflict that basically defined the first decade of his career. This was a man literally torn between two completely different worlds of writing.
He actually had a name for it, his double track. See, on one hand, he had these huge ambitions. He wanted to be a great American novelist, in the tradition of Joyce or Proust. But on the other hand, he was just hopelessly hooked on the wild, out-there ideas of science fiction.
And Dick said it himself, right? He said, I occupied two worlds, which normally did not intersect. I mean, these two scenes, the whole highbrow literary world and the, pulp sci-fi magazines, they just didn't mix at all. So for years, he tried to live and write in both of them at the exact same time.
So, next up, a tale of two tracks. Okay, so let's actually break down these two tracks, because trying to follow both of them at once, it couldn't have led to more different results, and honestly, it just about broke him as a writer.
And I mean, when you put them side by side, the contrast is just wow. It's stark. So you've got the realist. His goal, write these serious critiques of American society. The kind of thing that gets you taken seriously. The result? Total, complete failure. Not a single one of those books got published. But then you look at the sci-fi writer. He's exploring the same themes, but in what was considered this lowbrow cultural ghetto. And the result? He was churning out hundreds of stories that people actually wanted to read.
So you gotta ask, why did the serious novels fail so badly? Well, Robinson's analysis is pretty blunt about it. They just weren't very good. They were often way too long, kind of grim and humorless, and just all over the place. The very seriousness he was aiming for is exactly what ended up making them, well, dull.
So after years and years of getting nothing but rejection letters, Dick finally makes this huge decision. He's done. He gives up on realism and decides to go all in on science fiction. But here's the key. He wasn't giving up on his big ideas. Oh no! Instead, he decided he was going to smuggle his serious social critiques into the genre he truly loved.
Section 3. This is where it gets good. The Philip K. Dick Toolkit, Forging a New Language. And this is where things get really, really cool. See, Dick didn't just write science fiction. He took its core ingredients, all the tropes and cliches, and he built this entirely new artistic toolkit from them. You have to remember, the science fiction of his day, what they call the Golden Age, was often super optimistic, a little rigid, very straightforward. Dick's whole method was brilliantly simple. Take all those established ideas and just flip them completely upside down. He wanted to reveal a darker, way more complicated truth about our own world.
Okay, let's take the alien, for example. In Golden Age sci-fi, what are aliens? They're usually monsters, right? Invaders. But in Dick's universe, the aliens are often the most humane, the most compassionate, the sanest characters in the whole story. They're basically holding a mirror up to show us how monstrous we can be.
And he did the exact same thing with robots. The classic, Asimov-style message was always kind of comforting. Hey, the robot is just like us. Dick's androids, they were a terrifying inversion of that. They were so complex, so unbelievably human-like, that they forced this really unsettling new message on you. We are just like the robot. The implication being that we're the ones becoming cold, programmed machines.
And this quote from Robinson just hits the nail on the head. He says, instead of the robot is just like us, Dick's robots convey the message, we are just like the robot. I mean, Dick wasn't using androids to explore the humanity of machines. He was using them to question the humanity that was fading away in people. But his biggest, his most important tool, his signature move really, was what we call the reality breakdown. This is the classic PKD moment. A character's just going about their day, everything seems normal, and then, bam! The world just dissolves. The floor vanishes. A wall suddenly becomes a piece of paper with the word wall written on it. It is the ultimate expression of his paranoia and that central theme. You absolutely cannot trust your reality.
Okay, next section, the leap to masterpiece, the man in the high castle. So, it's 1962. After years of sharpening these incredible tools, Dick finally puts it all together. He manages to synthesize his two warring creative selves and produces his first undisputed masterpiece.
Yeah, The Man in the High Castle. This is the book where the realist writer and the sci-fi writer inside him finally stopped fighting and became one. He brought all that psychological depth and the sharp character focus from his failed novels and merged it with the wild, speculative power of sci-fi. And what came out of it was, well, it was revolutionary for the genre.
So the premise is a classic what if, a staple of the alternative history genre. What if FDR was assassinated back in '32? In this timeline, the Axis powers win World War II. The novel then drops us right into the 1960s in an America that's been carved up and occupied by Germany and Japan, and it just explores the quiet, everyday lives of the people trying to get by. And this right here marks maybe the most profound shift in all of his work. Because unlike his earlier stuff, this book isn't about some hero leading a glorious revolution. No, it's a much darker, much more realistic story. It's about the little moral compromises and the small acts of defiance that it takes just to stay human inside a system that you have no power to change.
All right, our final section. Why Dick still matters. And this brings us to the big question, right? Why are we still talking about some sci-fi writer from the 1960s? The answer is simple. Because the questions he was asking back then have become the defining questions of our time.
I mean, Dick's legacy is just immense. He's the guy who really elevated science fiction from just escapist fun into a powerful tool for serious philosophy. He saw way ahead of his time how technology and media could just totally destabilize our sense of what's real. And most importantly, he never ever stopped asking what it even means to be human in a world full of AI and simulated realities.
So, Philip K. Dick leaves us with this. He showed us that history isn't some fixed, solid thing, and that reality itself can be fragile, a construct. And it just makes you wonder, doesn't it, if the world can be rewritten so easily in his stories, just how solid is the ground we're all standing on right now?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an ancient battle, a battle over the very nature of reality itself. And you might be surprised where it all starts. Not in some dusty old text, but in the mind of one of science fiction's greatest authors.
And get this, that quote, it's not a line from one of his sci-fi masterpieces. Nope. Philip K. Dick actually believed this. I mean, he really believed it. After he had these, well, incredibly intense visions, he filled thousands of pages with his thoughts, a whole system he called the Gnostic Revelation.
So, according to Dick, we're all trapped in this fake reality. A prison built by a god who's frankly out of his mind. He was convinced that deep down, we're all divine beings, but we're basically asleep at the wheel, totally clueless about where we really come from, the stars. But here's the kicker, the really wild part. These ideas weren't his. He didn't just dream them up. So the question is, where on earth did he get them?
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, you have to realize that for Philip K. Dick, this wasn't some cool idea for a book. This was real. It all came from a series of visions he had back in 1974, an experience he was convinced pulled back the curtain on the true Gnostic nature of everything.
And that right there is the central mystery we're unpacking today. Was this just a brilliant, maybe troubled author whose imagination ran away with him? Or was he tapping into some kind of forbidden knowledge, something that's almost 2,000 years old? To find out, we've got to go back in time. Way back. To 3rd century Rome.
Okay, so picture this. 3rd century Rome. We meet this giant of philosophy, Plotinus, the guy who basically founded Neoplatonism. And he's locked in what scholars now call a philosophical border war. And who are his enemies? Well, get this. It's a group of incredibly smart rival thinkers that he actually knew, people he ironically called his friends.
So on one side, you've got Plotinus, who's defending the classic Greek idea, that the world is this beautiful, orderly creation from a good, divine craftsman. Pretty standard stuff. But his Gnostic rivals, they said, nope, not even close. They argued the complete opposite. This world isn't beautiful. It's an evil, deterministic prison, slapped together by an ignorant, arrogant, and totally incompetent creator.
And the whole fight really boils down to this one term, the demiurge. For Plato, the demiurge was the good guy, the divine craftsman. But the Gnostics, they completely flipped the script. In their version, the demiurge, the creator of our world, is the villain. That one twist, that tells you everything you need to know. It was a total rejection of the entire philosophical system of the day.
So Plotinus gets so mad, he writes this scathing takedown called Against the Gnostics. And for like 1,500 years, that was pretty much all we had, his side of the story. He basically won the war. He defined who they were, told everyone why they were wrong, and that was that. The Gnostics were written off, just a weird little footnote in the history of philosophy.
But then, everything changed. In the 20th century, the whole story got blown wide open. Suddenly, studying Gnosticism became this incredible detective story. And it led to this brand new, totally cutting-edge theory about what these ancient rebels were really up to. The big breakthrough came in 1945 in a place called Nag Hammadi in Egypt. A whole library of actual Gnostic texts was discovered. I mean, can you imagine? For the first time, after centuries of hearing from their enemies, we could finally hear their side of the story, in their own words. And it changed everything. It gave scholars a way more sophisticated picture of who these people were.
And this is the key idea that came out of it. Gnosticism wasn't just some quirky religion. It was a deliberate, conscious act of rebellion. A scholar named Dylan Burns puts it this way. He calls them cultural warriors. He argues they didn't just happen to hate the world. They actively manufactured that difference. They wanted to draw a line in the sand and create a total break from mainstream culture.
See, according to Burns, the reason this whole fight was so vicious is that the Gnostics weren't just some fringe mystics. They were seriously smart philosophers. They were taking Plato's own ideas and twisting them to attack Plotinus on his home turf. It was a direct challenge, and it forced Plotinus to push back, hard, just to protect the very identity of his own school.
And this is where it all comes together. This new way of seeing the Gnostics brings us right back to where we started, with Philip K. Dick. And it shows us that what he saw, what he experienced, well, it wasn't just some random fantasy he cooked up.
I mean, look at this. When you put Philip K. Dick's core beliefs right next to what we now know about the Gnostics, it's uncanny. It's almost a one-to-one match. His whole vision wasn't just him remembering their myths. It was a modern-day reenactment of their entire exile strategy. The crazy battle for reality that he thought he was fighting in the 1970s, it actually started almost 2 millennia ago.
It's just incredible, right? This idea, this whole Gnostic worldview, this strategy of exile, it never really died. It traveled all the way from these heated philosophical debates in ancient Rome right to the desk of a sci-fi writer in California. The idea that this reality is a cage and we've got to find a way out, it's just as powerful today.
So it really makes you think, doesn't it? If these ancient ideas could so completely capture the imagination of a genius like Philip K. Dick, what else have they touched? What other parts of our culture, our movies, our art, maybe even our own quiet beliefs have been shaped by this ancient war for reality? What else is hiding out there right in plain sight?
All right, let's just jump right in. We're going to unpack a really fascinating academic paper, and it's got a title that, it's designed to make you look twice. Deleuze's Dick. But you got to stick with me here because this is way more than just shock value. This is actually our key to unlocking a pretty radical philosophy, all through the lens of one of the most popular genres ever, the detective novel. And this quote right here from the sci-fi legend Philip K. Dick, it just perfectly sets the stage for the whole problem. How are we supposed to think about what's real when our world is just flooded with fakes, with these manufactured realities? When all the old rules, all the old systems just seem to be breaking down all the time? What kind of thinking do you even need when the universe itself feels like it's designed to fall apart?
Okay, so let's just address the elephant in the room. What exactly are we talking about when we use the word dick in this context? Because it is the key to this entire argument.
We are talking about old school slang. The term dick eventually came to mean a private investigator, a detective. But here's the thing, not just any detective. We're talking about a very specific type of character, someone who operates on the fringes of society, and that difference is absolutely crucial. And this brings us right to the heart of it all, a tale of two very different detectives. You can think of them as stand-ins, really, for two completely different ways of thinking, of approaching and solving problems. So on one side, you've got your classical detective. Think Sherlock Holmes. He's this brilliant, rational mastermind. He uses pure logic and deduction to uncover a single, pre-existing truth. His world makes sense. It has rules. But on the other side, you've got the dick. He's the ex-cop who got fired, the drifter, the guy who's seen too much. He doesn't really solve a crime so much as he just survives it, making a ton of mistakes along the way. He's not finding some hidden truth. He's forcing a messy resolution in a world where truth is totally up for grabs. So what this really means is that a character like Sherlock Holmes is a perfect metaphor for what we might call traditional philosophy. It's a way of thinking that starts with the assumption that the rules of the game are already set. The whole goal is just to apply those rules correctly to find the answer that's already there, just waiting to be discovered. But the hard-boiled Dick, well, he represents a whole different beast. This is the model for thinking when you're up against a problem that's so new, so messy, that all the old rulebooks are basically useless. You can't just deduce your way out of it, you have to get your hands dirty and invent a way forward.
And this is the moment where we pivot. We're going from gritty crime fiction straight into the mind of a major 20th century philosopher, Gilles Deleuze, because he saw this incredibly profound connection between the two. Now, Deleuze isn't just tossing out a clever metaphor here. He's making a really serious claim about the style of thinking itself. He genuinely believed that real, groundbreaking philosophy should work like a hard-boiled detective story, not just look like one, but share its fundamental problem-solving DNA. This all leads us to Deleuze's main project, something he called transcendental empiricism. I know, it sounds like a mouthful, but that detective analogy we've been using makes it totally clear. It's a philosophy designed for a world that's always in motion. Instead of applying old universal ideas to every problem, the philosopher, just like the Dick, has to invent new concepts on the fly, concepts that are custom-built for the specific, unprecedented case right in front of them. So let's dig into that a little more. What exactly is it that makes this way of thinking so different, so powerful? What's the secret, so to speak, that makes it so perfect for our often chaotic world? You see, for Deleuze, thinking is this fluid, adaptive, creative process. Concepts aren't these sacred truths carved into stone. No way. They're tools. You build a tool for a specific job, and when the situation changes, and it always, always does, you remake that tool. Or you just toss it out and build a brand new one. So here's the big takeaway. The secret to this whole philosophy is how radically practical it is. It's not about finding the answer with a capital T and A. It's about a constant process of creating and adapting, of inventing solutions for specific local situations, right here, right now. Okay, so if philosophy is all about creating new concepts, that has enormous implications for the main tool we use for thinking, language itself. For Deleuze, language isn't just something we use to describe the world, it's something we use to create the world. Just look at the tiny but incredibly powerful difference between saying the crime and a crime. When we say the crime, it implies we're dealing with a known category. We're slotting this event into a box that already has labels on it. But a crime, well, that's something else entirely. That's an event. It's an open-ended problem that forces you to create a whole new framework just to understand it, let alone solve it. And this brings us to one of Deleuze's coolest and most fascinating ideas. He argued that the real power of literature, especially this kind of gritty crime fiction, is to make language stutter, to force it to break away from its comfortable everyday meanings and actually say something entirely new. So how does that work? Well, it happens in 4 key ways. Literature creates a becoming, an event where all the old meanings just fall apart. It creates percepts, fictional images and feelings that are so strong they literally change how we think. It invents a new kind of health by disrupting old, stagnant ways of thinking. And it does all of this, of course, by making language stutter, by breaking it free to invent whole new realities. It's basically storytelling as a philosophical engine. Now, let's take all of this and apply it to one of our biggest, most fundamental concepts, justice. The hard-boiled crime novel, it turns out, does more than just entertain us. It completely flips our traditional understanding of the law right on its head. And the contrast here is just stark. In your classic whodunit, justice is all about restoring a fixed, moral order. It's about finding that one guilty person so everything can go back to being right. But in the world of the Dick, a crime is just the violation of some temporary contract. Justice isn't about truth. It's about negotiating a new fragile peace. It's a compensation of errors, not a restoration of some grand order. And this leads to a really, really radical conclusion. What the Dick shows us is that the law isn't some absolute, unchanging moral truth. It's a shaky deal. It's a temporary contract. That line between the legal world and the criminal world isn't a solid wall. It's a constantly shifting negotiation. So what crime fiction really shows us, in the end, is society and what Deleuze called its highest power of the false. Now, that does not mean society is a lie. Not at all. It means that society isn't based on fixed, eternal truths. It's a creative, dynamic system of constantly shifting values, deals, and contracts. It's a kind of fiction that all of us are constantly rewriting together. So, I'll just leave you with this question. The next time you're faced with a truly new problem, one of those situations where the old rules just don't seem to apply anymore, which path are you going to take? Are you going to be the classical detective searching for a pre-written answer in some dusty old rulebook? Or are you going to be the Dick, stepping right into the chaos to invent a new way forward?
All right, let's dive into one of the wildest, most fascinating minds in all of literature, the science fiction author Philip K. Dick. We're going on a journey into a secret universe, a place where reality itself is unstable and God might just be a living, thinking computer program.
Everything really starts with this one single sentence: the empire never ended. It's this incredibly chilling line from his novel Valis. But here's the thing, for Philip K. Dick, this wasn't just a cool concept for a book. He believed it was a fundamental truth, one that was blasted into his brain during a series of intense, reality-shattering visions back in 1974. He would spend the rest of his life trying to figure out what it all meant.
So what did he actually see? Well, get this. He became convinced he was living in two timelines at the exact same time, his life in 1970s California and the life of a persecuted Christian in ancient Rome. He felt this vast, intelligent entity was beaming information directly into his head through a pink beam of light. And to understand all this, he didn't turn to modern science. No, he went back, way back, to ancient philosophy. So today, we're going to follow that breadcrumb trail he left behind.
Okay, so the first big piece of the puzzle for Dick came from these ancient mystical schools of thought, Gnosticism and Hermeticism. Both of them gave him a language to describe this feeling he had that reality was just wrong, that it was some kind of prison, a black iron prison, as he called it. You know, Gnosticism just clicked for him. The idea that our world wasn't created by the true ultimate God, but by a lesser, flawed, maybe even blind entity, a demiurge, and that this demiurge had trapped us all in a counterfeit reality, that perfectly explained the illusion he felt all around him. And for the Gnostics, the only way out was gnosis, secret knowledge, a theme you see pretty much everywhere in Dick's writing. Then you've got Hermeticism, which offered a kind of different angle. Its core belief is summed up in the phrase, as above, so below. This gave Dick the idea that the entire universe, the macrocosm, could be perfectly reflected inside a single human mind, the microcosm. So, in this view, the universe is almost like a hologram, and our own inner world holds the key to understanding the whole thing. So you have these two really powerful ancient ideas, right? On one hand, the Gnostic view says reality is a jail we need to break out of. On the other, the Hermetic view says reality is a reflection we need to learn how to read. Dick didn't just pick one, he mashed them together. And next, we're going to see how another philosopher gave him a hands-on method for exploring that inner reflection.
So the next big clue in this mystery comes from a guy named Giordano Bruno, a wild philosopher and mystic from the 16th century. He's the one who took those Hermetic ideas about the universe within the mind and tried to turn them into an actual technique. And Dick was not subtle about his admiration. In his private journals, this massive 8,000-page work he called the Exegesis, he just comes right out and says it. Clearly, Bruno is my main man. He saw Bruno as someone who didn't just talk the talk, he had a real method for hacking into that cosmic reflection. So what was Bruno's method? It was basically this occult memory art. The idea was you could intentionally imprint these incredibly powerful, symbolic, magical images onto your own memory. By structuring your mind in the same way the cosmos is structured, you could essentially turn your brain into a mirror that could reflect and therefore understand all of reality. And this all comes down to a really important kind of mind-bending concept called amnesia. For both Bruno and Dick, this isn't just about remembering your childhood, no. It's about the loss of forgetfulness. It's about recovering a vast, divine, super long-term memory, knowledge from past lives, from the collective unconscious, maybe even from the mind of God itself. Dick believed his visions in 74 were a sudden, overwhelming blast of amnesia.
Okay, the last major piece of the puzzle came from a 17th century German mystic, Jacob Boehme. Dick took Boehme's incredibly dense vision of how God evolves and basically rebooted it for the computer age. He started to see the entire universe as a kind of divine computer.
So Dick came up with this theory that the universe works on a binary system, a simple 0 and 1. First, you get the 0 phase. This is the universe, or God, testing out a provisional reality, a beta version, if you will. It's a possibility that's ultimately flawed and gets discarded. This is what Boehme called God's no. It's like a failed timeline. But then comes the 1 phase. The system instantly recognizes the error in the 0 reality, scraps it, and puts the best possible version into place. This is what Boehme called God's yes.
The universe we're all living in right now is that corrected version, constantly upgrading itself as part of this huge self-correcting system that's always pushing towards perfection.
And this table just lays it out so perfectly. You can really see how Dick acted as a translator. He took Bohm's mystical yes-no dialectic and turned it into a computer's 0-1 binary system. The Urgrund, which is Bohm's term for the ultimate ground of being, becomes the true maker in Dick's sci-fi world. And that flash of divine insight Bohm called the Blitz, for Dick, that was the infusion of Volus, the vast active living intelligence system.
So let's put all this together. Gnosticism gave him the idea of a flawed reality. Bruno gave him a way to access the true reality through memory. And Bohm gave him a model for a cosmic operating system. So what does that universe actually look like when you combine all of that?
Well, in Dick's final grand theory, our world is a projection, run by that blind Gnostic demiurge. But there's good news. A living, healing information system, what he called the plasmate, or Valus, is actively breaking through from the true maker to save us. It bonds with certain people, triggering that divine memory, that amnesias, and turns them into agents to fight the empire of illusion. And the ultimate goal? For our reality to become a perfect one-to-one reflection of the divine. And when that happens, the fake reality shatters, and we finally become truly, immortally real. So in the end, we're left with this really provocative question, aren't we? In our modern age of AI, simulated realities, and constant information warfare, was Philip K. Dick a prophet who somehow saw the source code running behind our world? Or was he the ultimate unreliable narrator, lost in the beautiful, terrifying labyrinth of his own mind? Like in all his best novels, the answer is probably a little bit of both.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the mind of a true sci-fi master, Philip K. Dick. We're going to dive into the strange, mystical code and the secret influences that totally transformed his work. So, what if an ancient mystic's vision could actually explain our digital world? Sounds pretty wild, right? Well, that's the exact question that haunted Philip K. Dick after an experience that literally shattered his reality. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's 1974, and suddenly, Philip K. Dick is just bombarded by these incredibly intense visions. He famously called it his 2374 experience, and it just completely upended everything he thought was real. This wasn't just a weird week. It kicked off an obsessive, lifelong quest for answers. And this quote, "The empire never ended," became his mantra. But you gotta understand, for Dick, this wasn't just a cool line for a book. He was dead serious. He became convinced that history as we know it was an illusion, a kind of mental prison, and that some hidden reality was pulling the strings. And his new obsession? Figuring out how it all worked. So to try and figure out what in the world was happening to him, Dick didn't go to modern science or philosophy. Nope, he went backwards, way back. He started digging deep into ancient mystical traditions, Gnosticism, the occult. Basically, he was looking for a lost map to this secret reality he was now seeing.
And you know what? He found his guide. Her name was Dame Frances Yates, a historian, and her work pretty much became his Rosetta Stone. She wrote about the Renaissance Hermetic tradition, and in her books, Dick discovered this whole line of thinkers who, centuries ago, seemed to be describing the exact same things he was experiencing. It must have been mind-blowing.
So Yates led him right to the doorstep of Hermeticism. And what's so cool about this ancient philosophy is its core belief, as above, so below. All that means is that the entire universe, the macrocosm, is perfectly reflected inside each one of us, the microcosm. Imagine that realization. For Dick, the answers weren't out there in the stars anymore, they were right inside his own head. And as he explored this hermetic world, Dick found three key thinkers who basically became his secret mentors. You can think of them as giving him three crucial pieces of the giant puzzle he was trying to solve about his mind, reality, everything. So first up was this Renaissance physician and alchemist, a guy named Paracelsus. Now his big idea was that every single person is born with what he called an inner firmament. Think of it like a complete spiritual cosmos, a reflection of the heavens, already built inside you. So we're not just in the universe is literally in us. Okay, next up was the philosopher Giordano Bruno, and he took this whole idea and just ran with it. He believed you could do more than just reflect the universe, you could actively build a model of it inside your own head. He called it magical memory. It was almost like you could download the entire cosmos into your mind and become a magus, someone who could master their own reality. Pretty wild stuff. So you see the two different paths here, right? For Paracelsus, the mind is kind of like a passive mirror of the universe. It's just there, biologically hardwired in. But for Bruno, the mind is an active tool. You can build that universe inside you. Both believe the mind is a universe, but the big question for Dick was, which one was it for him? Well, we don't have to guess. In his own private journals, his exegesis, Dick makes it crystal clear. Clearly, Bruno's my main man. He saw Bruno's idea of cosmic knowledge just flooding into your mind as the perfect explanation for his visions. This wasn't him going crazy. This was emanacious. Not just remembering something, but recovering this lost universal knowledge that was always there.
But here's the thing. Paracelsus and Bruno gave him a framework for the mind, but not for the mechanism of reality itself. To get that final and honestly most shocking piece of the puzzle, Dick had to turn to a 17th century German mystic named Jacob Boehme. And this is where things get really interesting.
Boehme wrote about this concept he called the ground. Now, try to wrap your head around this. It's the primordial ground of all being. It's like a divine abyss, this unmanifest nothing that existed before anything and everything. You can think of it as the source code of reality before the program starts running.
And according to Boehme, creation kicks off when this nothing starts a kind of cosmic argument with itself. It's a dialectic that generates opposites, yes and no, light and dark, being and non-being. And out of that tension, the incredible complexity of our entire world springs into existence.
And this is the moment where Philip K. Dick makes the most incredible leap. He reads Boehme's mystical description of a yes and a no emerging from a divine nothing, and a light bulb just goes off. He saw a perfect one-to-one parallel with modern binary code.
Think about it. The zero is Boehme's Urgrund, the nothing. The one is the divine yes that brings forth creation. For Philip K. Dick, the basic language of our entire digital age, the ones and zeros that build our reality, wasn't some new invention. It was an ancient mystic's vision of how God creates the universe. Absolutely mind-bending.
So, okay. After this wild intellectual journey through secret history, ancient mystics, and computer code, where did Dick land? What did his final, synthesized worldview actually look like?
Well, he basically came to believe that our reality is a kind of computer program, and it's being projected by a flawed, lesser god, what the Gnostics called the demiurge, who doesn't even know its own origin. But, and this is the key part, our minds, because they are microcosms, can bypass this flawed program. We can connect directly with the true source code, with Boehme's Urgrund, through these visionary states.
And this whole grand, complicated, incredible idea, this synthesis of ancient mysticism and modern info theory, this became the beating heart of his masterpiece, the novel Valis. It's a book that's, it's part sci-fi, part autobiography, and part theological deep dive. It's all in there.
And so, we're left right back where we started, with the same haunting question that drove Philip K. Dick for the last decade of his life. If our world really is a projection, a program running on ancient mystical code, what happens when we look past the illusion? What's actually waiting for us beyond the screen?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the bizarre and often terrifying universe of sci-fi author Philip K. Dick. His stories are legendary, right? They're famous for these reality-bending plots and characters who can't even trust their own minds. But what if there's a deeper logic, a hidden pattern in all that chaos?
To really get a handle on his work, we have to start with the man himself. In a 1974 interview, he said this. He saw the universe not as this cold, dead place, but as a single living thing that's constantly squirming and changing, maybe even running from something. And that one idea right there sets the stage for everything, a universe that is anything but stable.
So here's our game plan. We're going to unpack this whole worldview, but we're going to do it through a very specific academic argument by a critic named Samuel Umland. We'll follow his four-part structure to see exactly how he makes sense of the cosmic horror in Dick's fiction.
Okay, let's jump right in with part 1, the Dionysian element. Our journey starts with this really powerful concept that Samuel Umland believes is the central driving force behind almost everything Philip K. Dick wrote. So, Umland argues that many of Dick's stories are powered by what he calls the Dionysian element. And listen, this isn't just random chaos. It's a very specific kind of cosmic force. It's irrational, it's ecstatic, and it's so powerful it can completely dissolve a person's sense of self.
And this is a great way to think about it. It frames the central conflict in Dick's work as this epic battle between two ancient Greek ideas. On one side, you've got the Apollonian, That's reason, order, logic, a stable sense of who you are. But on the other side, you've got the Dionysian, and that's ecstatic madness, total chaos, and the terrifying fusion of yourself with something much, much bigger. Okay, so this all sounds pretty abstract, right? How does this Dionysian force actually play out in a story? Well, to see it in action, Umland points to one single, incredibly disturbing short story from 1953 as his prime piece of evidence. The story is called Upon the Dull Earth, and it starts with a pretty classic setup. You've got a young guy, Rick, who's messing with forces he can't possibly understand, summoning these supernatural beings, but come on, this is a Philip K. Dick story, so you know that one simple act is about to spiral into an absolute nightmare of personal annihilation. The progression of what happens here is just horrifying. See, the Dionysian force doesn't just kill the character Sylvia, it consumes and replaces her. It starts when Rick summons these so-called angelic beings. Then, Sylvia's life force just drains away, leaving her an empty shell. That shell gets possessed by some alien thing, and finally, she's replaced by a monstrous copycat that wears her face but is completely inhuman. So what in the world just happened here? This transformation is so bizarre, it's hard to even label. Umland actually explores a few different frameworks to try and diagnose what's going on. And this is the core question, isn't it? Are we just watching a character's inner world collapse, a total psychotic break from reality? Or is this an external, literal, supernatural invasion that is tearing her apart from the outside in? The genius of the story is that it deliberately blurs that line. One way to wrap our heads around this is with the ancient Greek concept of enthusiasmos. It's actually where we get our word enthusiasm, but the original meaning is way more intense. It literally means to be possessed by the god, a state where your individual personality is just completely wiped out by a divine power taking over. Umland also looks at this through a modern psychological lens. He connects it to the work of Carl Jung, suggesting it's similar to a psychotic break, where these powerful, ancient symbols from our shared collective unconscious just erupt and completely shatter a person's ego. But, a purely psychological explanation feels incomplete. It kind of reduces this cosmic horror to a personal problem, like we're just labeling the characters crazy, and that totally misses the point. This leads Umland to his final, and I think his most powerful conclusion. So yeah, if it's something more than just a mental breakdown, what tools can we even use to analyze these kinds of experiences in a story? How do we take the horror seriously, on its own terms? And this is the crucial shift Umland proposes. He says we need to completely change our perspective. We should stop trying to diagnose the characters and instead start analyzing their experiences, using the tools from the study of religion itself. He pulls this idea from the Eranos school, which was this hugely influential group of 20th century thinkers. We're talking heavy hitters here. People like the psychologist Carl Jung, the historian of religion Mircea Eliade, and the scholar of mysticism Gershom Scholem. These guys dedicated their lives to understanding religious and mythological experiences across all cultures. And this right here is the key takeaway. Looking through this lens changes everything. It allows us to see the events in the story not as symptoms of madness, but as genuine and absolutely terrifying encounters with the sacred. Sylvia's transformation becomes a violent, divine possession, a religious event to be analyzed, not a disease to be diagnosed. Ultimately, Umland argues that the horror in Philip K. Dick's work isn't just about losing your mind. It's about being trapped or cut off from the normal world and then being backed into a corner by a force so much bigger than you that the catastrophic end is just unavoidable. And this leaves us with a fascinating final thought. What if Dick's strange reality-shattering sci-fi isn't just about cool future tech or weird aliens? What if it's a modern vocabulary for describing an ancient and primal human fear, the absolute terror of encountering a god you can't control and you can't escape? Philip K. Dick. You've probably heard the name. He's one of the most visionary, most out-there writers of the 20th century. His work is just this incredible maze of paranoia, fake realities, and deep, deep existential dread. But here's the thing. At the absolute heart of it all is this amazing paradox. The guy was an architect of worlds, but he built them just so he could watch them fall apart. So, let's get into it. I mean, this quote says it all, right? This is the key.
Dick wasn't just writing adventure stories where things go wrong. No, he was running these wild philosophical experiments on the very nature of reality itself. It's just a brilliant window into the mind of a master. So, that's the big question. Why? Why build something so beautiful and intricate just to smash it? And more importantly, what can we learn from sifting through the rubble? Well, to figure that out, we're going to lean on this fantastic book by philosopher David Lapouget called Worlds Built to Fall Apart. It's basically the perfect toolkit for understanding the beautiful, terrifying chaos of Philip K. Dick. Okay, so according to Lapouget, the place to start isn't with what we normally call madness or confusion. Nope. It's with a very specific, very powerful concept that pretty much drives everything in Dick's fiction: delirium. Now, you've got to understand, when we talk about delirium here, it's not what you think. It's not just a symptom or a side effect. In Dick's work, delirium isn't a bug, it's a feature. It is the engine that actually creates a whole new world, a world with its own logic, its own rules, and it will fight tooth and nail to prove that it's the real one. Let's break that down. In most stories, a quote-unquote mad character is just someone who's lost their grip on the one true reality that everybody else is in. But in a Philip K. Dick story, oh no. It's a full-blown war. There isn't just one reality. There are multiple competing realities, and they are all battling for dominance. Lapouget gives us this fantastic analogy. Don Quixote. Think about it. His delirium is so strong, it creates its own bulletproof logic. When the world shows him a windmill, he doesn't question his reality. He doubles down. He invents an explanation, a conspiracy of evil sorcerers, just to keep his world intact. That is exactly how reality functions or dysfunctions in Dick's universe.
So if delirium is the why, now we get to the fun part, the how. How exactly does Philip K. Dick build these realities that are designed to break? Well, he has a few favorite tools in his toolbox.
These are pretty much the four horsemen of the Dickian apocalypse. He doesn't just mess with the story, he attacks reality at its most basic levels. Cause and effect? Gone. The normal forward flow of time? Nope. The line between what's real and what's fake, or even what's alive and what's dead? Yeah, that gets real blurry real fast.
Just take the idea of entropy. In his absolute masterpiece, Ubik, the world doesn't just decay, it actively goes backward. Time regresses, but only for objects. A brand new futuristic ship might devolve into a biplane, then into an old car. It's this chilling, incredible visual of a world literally coming unglued piece by piece. And this decay, this breakdown of the physical world, it's mirrored in the people too. So many of Dick's characters are trapped in this bizarre state of semi-life. They're physically dead, but their consciousness is preserved, floating in these decaying, regressing worlds. Their very existence is as unstable as the reality they're experiencing. And this quote from Lapouget's analysis just nails it. In Dick's fiction, you aren't separate from your reality. You can't just step outside of it. If your world collapses, you collapse right along with it. Your identity and the stability of your universe are basically the exact same thing. Okay, so we have these broken, collapsing worlds. But what about the people, or the not quite people, who have to actually live there? I mean, what does it even mean to be human when reality itself is failing? So often, the central conflict boils down to this right here. For Philip K. Dick, the one thing, the only thing that really separates a human from an android, from a machine, it's not intelligence, it's empathy. It's that messy, unpredictable emotional connection that you just can't program.
And here's the question that Dick's work kind of forces us to ask ourselves, and it's a little uncomfortable. As you look at these two columns, logic, programming, efficiency, which one of those lists feels more valued in our society today?
So let's be super clear about this. Dick's paranoia, his great fear, it wasn't really about a robot uprising, Terminator style. His deepest, most terrifying fear was what he called the androidization of humanity. It was that we would willingly, happily give up our empathy, our randomness, our humanity to become cogs in the systems and algorithms we create. And in a world like that, paranoia isn't just a personal feeling, right? Lapouget frames it as a full-on social condition. It becomes a system where everybody is either hunting or being hunted, where trust is completely impossible, and the lines between friend and foe, or even yourself and someone else, just totally dissolve into nothing. I know, it sounds incredibly bleak, but
there is a glimmer of hope in these collapsing worlds. There is a very specific kind of hero who can actually navigate all this chaos. And they don't do it by imposing order, they do it by embracing the breakdown. This is where we get this incredible idea. The hero isn't the hyper-specialized engineer who follows the manual perfectly. No, it's the bricoleur. It's a French word for a kind of creative handyman, a tinkerer. This person is the ultimate anti-technocratic hero. See, the bricoleur's power comes from being adaptable. They refuse to be just another cog in the machine. They take the junk, the garbage, the broken pieces of a fallen world, and they just start tinkering. They improvise. They assemble something new and completely unpredictable from the fragments. And in that simple act of creation, that's where they find freedom. And this brings us to the final and honestly the most important question of all. Why does any of this matter to us right now? Well, because Philip K. Dick wasn't just writing about some distant future. He was diagnosing our present. Just think about it for a second. The artificial worlds he dreamed up, designed to manipulate and control people, hello, that's our perfectly curated social media feeds. The pervasive social paranoia where no one knows what's real, that's the rabbit hole of online conspiracy theories. The digital humans, stripped of empathy and just running on code, that is the exact debate we are having right now about AI and automation. He got it. He understood this decades and decades ago. He knew that the battle for reality is always a battle over language, a battle over information. This quote feels less like science fiction and more like a headline you'd read this morning. So in the end, Dick's collapsing worlds don't just give us a story. They leave us with a challenge. In a world of fragments, of misinformation, of competing realities, we are all forced to be bricklayers. We are all taking the broken pieces we find around us, and we are building a world. So the only question left is, what kind of world are you building? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to jump into the absolutely wild, chaotic worlds of the science fiction legend Philip K. Dick. But we're going to look at them through a really specific and I think fascinating lens, the analysis of philosopher David Lapouget. You know, to really get a handle on Philip K. Dick, or PKD, as he's often called, you've got to start right here with this quote. According to Lapouget, this isn't just some edgy, clever one-liner. It's the master key to his entire creative project. So PKD was famous for building these incredible, complex future worlds, right? But the crazy thing is, his real joy, the thing he admitted himself, wasn't in making them stable. It was in building them specifically so he could watch them fall apart at the seams. And that obsession with things just breaking down, it naturally leads you to the big question that everyone associates with his work. What is reality? It's this deep, almost metaphysical obsession that you see in pretty much every single story he ever wrote. But here's where the philosopher David Lapouget steps in and says, hold on a second. He argues that maybe, just maybe, by focusing so much on that big philosophical question, we've actually been missing a more fundamental problem at the heart of Dick's work. So, Lapouget's whole argument, his central idea, is that the real fight in these stories isn't metaphysical, it's clinical. It's not a philosophical debate about the nature of the universe, it's a constant, brutal war between competing minds. And the key word for all of this is delirium. But not in the way you might think of it, like just simple madness. For Dick, delirium is when you are absolutely 100% convinced that your private world is the real world. The problem is, you're surrounded by other people who feel the exact same way about their private worlds. And what you get is something the philosopher William James called a pluriverse. It's not one single universe. No, it's this messy, chaotic battleground where all these different realities are crashing into each other, fighting for control using mental weapons, things like propaganda, drugs, even psychic powers. Okay, so if these worlds are basically battlefields for the mind, what are they actually made of? What are the bricks and mortar? Well, this is where Lapouget makes this really cool connection to pop art. He basically says that PKD's genius was taking all the junk of American consumer culture, all the disposable, fake plastic stuff, what he calls trash, and using it not just as background detail, but as the very fabric of his worlds. I mean, just think about it. We're talking about worlds built out of living advertisements that talk to you, fake memories that get implanted in your brain, whole towns that are just cardboard cutouts, you've got electric sheep because real ones are gone, and androids acting as psychoanalysts. In these worlds, the artificial isn't just common,
It's completely taken over.
So you've got this war for reality, right? And it's built out of all this cultural trash. Lapujada says this war is fought between two main characters, two archetypes, that actually represent a split inside our own heads. On one side, you've got the android, what he calls the digital human. Think of it like the left brain, all logic, algorithms, no feelings. Its whole goal is to control and program everything. And on the other side, you've got the empathic human. This is the right brain, intuitive and illogical, all about sympathy and connection. It doesn't see the world as code, it experiences it as life.
And look, this is way deeper than just a simple humans versus robots story. For PKD, the real, ultimate horror was this idea of the androidization of humanity. The terrifying thought that we could become so programmed, so logical, that we lose the very empathy that makes us human in the first place. So, in these completely chaotic worlds that are designed to fall apart, who's the hero? Well, it's probably not who you're thinking of. Lepouge points to a figure he calls the bricoleur. It's a French word, and it basically means a tinkerer, a handyman, a DIY kind of person. This is someone who doesn't have a grand design, they just work with whatever scraps and spare parts are lying around. And this is so important. This hero does not have some grand plan to save the universe or create a perfect society. That kind of big, systematic thinking, that's for the androids. This person isn't trying to write a new operating system for the world. They're just trying to find a spare part to fix what's broken right in front of them. Instead, it's all about what Dick himself called the minor man. He's not trying to build some grand utopia. He's just this ordinary, flawed, sweaty person trying to patch up the broken world he's been given, using whatever empathy and care he has. And for Lapouge, this is really the ultimate moral of the story in Dick's fiction. In a universe that is fundamentally falling apart, where everything is trending toward chaos, the most heroic thing you can do isn't to conquer or control. It's simply to repair, to mend, to care, to piece life back together.
And that leaves us with one final question, right? A question that really hits home in our own complex world. In a world that so often feels like it's built to fall apart, who are we supposed to be? Are we the ones trying to program everything with cold logic? Or are we the empathetic repairmen, just trying to mend our little corner of the world with whatever tools we can find? All right, let's just dive right in. We're talking about a science fiction writer who got his start in pulp magazines, churning out stories for just pennies a word. And yet, today, his work is dissected by philosophers, literary critics, and even theologians. His name is Philip K. Dick. And the big question, the puzzle really, is this. How did a sci-fi author become one of the most important thinkers of our time? To really get Philip K. Dick, you have to start with one of his questions. The kind of questions that just get under your skin. Like, what if the world you woke up in this morning isn't the same one you went to sleep in? What if the people you love are just incredibly advanced robots? And what if your most cherished memories were just implanted yesterday? And that quote just nails it, doesn't it? It gets right to the heart of his work. His stories are built on this foundation of sand. Realities just dissolve, identities completely fracture, and you, the reader, are left right there with the characters, wondering if anything was ever real to begin with. So how did this master of paranoia and fake realities make that huge leap from the fringes of culture to the mainstream of literary thought? That's the first big puzzle that academics have been trying to solve for years. It's a pretty remarkable journey when you think about it. For most of his life, Dick was seen as this prolific but ultimately trashy genre writer. But since his death, there's been this incredible turnaround. Today, his novels are published in the super prestigious Library of America series. I mean, that puts him right alongside the literary giants. This slide tells such a powerful visual story. On one side, you see the world he came from, the lurid covers, the mass market paperbacks, and on the other, the world that has totally claimed him. Dense, scholarly analysis from critics like Frederick Jameson. It's the ultimate literary glow-up. And it's not just academics either. Artists and writers, they see it too. When Art Spiegelman, the creator of the masterpiece Mouse, makes a comparison like this one, you know something profound has happened. Dick isn't just a sci-fi writer anymore. He's become a key to understanding our entire era. Okay, so what exactly are scholars finding in his work that's so compelling? Well, the first major theme is his absolutely relentless investigation into the nature of reality itself. To understand Dick, you gotta know this word, simulacrum. It sounds complicated, but think of it like this. A photocopy of a photocopy repeated over and over until the original is just lost. Dick's worlds are full of them. In Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, real animals are almost extinct, so people own these unbelievably lifelike robotic fakes. These simulacra, the electric sheep, the ostriches, you name it, they become so central to life that the line between real and fake just dissolves. The copy becomes the only reality you have. Now, this is a fantastic way to look at his entire body of work. In a typical Dick story, a character starts to notice little glitches in their world, right? These tiny cracks in the facade. And through those cracks, a deeper, truer, but usually terrifying reality starts to leak in. And the crucial point here, as the scholar Christopher Palmer argues, is that Dick wasn't just writing about some far-off future. He was diagnosing our present. His fictional worlds are a direct response to a society totally saturated with media, with advertising, with politics, a world where the line between what's real and what's made up is constantly blurring. This whole questioning of the real, it leads directly to his second great obsession. It's the one that's at the heart of his most famous works. What does it actually mean to be human? This, in his own words, was his grand theme. It's the central question of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? You know, the novel that became the movie Blade Runner? How do you tell the difference between a person and a perfect imitation of a person? For Dick, the answer wasn't intelligence. It wasn't logic. In his world, the androids are often way more logical than the humans. No, the defining human quality, the one thing the machines can only mimic, is empathy. It's our irrationality, our compassion, our ability to care about a fake electric sheep. That's what proves we're real. And here is the brilliant and honestly terrifying twist that the critic Frederick Jameson pointed out. Dick takes Descartes' famous line, "I think, therefore I am," and he just flips it. In Dick's universe, if you have to stop and logically prove to yourself that you're human, you've already lost. The very act of rational self-interrogation becomes the sign that you might actually be the machine. All right, if you thought that was strange, well, buckle up. We're now going into the deepest, most personal layer of Dick's work, his unique brand of homebrewed cosmic theology. To get this next part, we need a quick definition of Gnosticism. It's this ancient mystical belief system with a really radical idea that our world is not the real world. It's a flawed copy, a prison, created by a lesser ignorant deity, and the only way out is through something called gnosis, a burst of secret divine knowledge that shatters the illusion. You can see why this appealed to him, right? A world that's a fake? A reality that's a prison? This ancient philosophy sounds exactly like a Philip K. Dick novel. The Gnostic framework basically provides a theological explanation for all the paranoia and alienation that fills his books. And for Dick, this wasn't just some literary device. After a series of really intense mystical visions back in 1974, he became convinced this was literally true. He spent the rest of his life writing this massive 8,000-page philosophical journal called the Exegesis, just trying to understand what happened to him. He came to believe his own novels weren't just stories about Gnosticism, they were vessels of Gnostis, designed to wake the reader up from the prison. So, let's bring it all together. You've got a pulp writer obsessed with fake realities, android empathy, and ancient theology. Why has his work become so essential for understanding our own world? This slide just illustrates the sheer versatility of Dick's work so perfectly. You can read him through almost any critical lens you want. Marxists like Jameson, they see a critique of consumer capitalism. Postmodernists like Palmer see a perfect illustration of our media-saturated society. Theologians like McKee explore his Gnostic ideas, and Jungians analyze his use of archetypes. The guy just contains multitudes. At the end of the day, he wasn't just writing fiction, he was building models of the future. As Christopher Palmer puts it, his work was a radical and spectacular anticipation of our own postmodern condition, a world of fakes, simulations, and fractured identities. And this is exactly why we can't stop reading him. Decades ago, he was writing about the very things that define our lives today. That feeling of being watched by technology, the anxiety that we've lost our authentic selves, the struggle to tell what's real in an endless stream of information, and of course, the rise of artificial intelligence. He saw it all coming. He gave us the questions, the language, and the paranoid framework to make sense of the bizarre reality we now find ourselves in, which leaves us with one final, very Dickian question to think about.
So, what is real? I mean, really, what is it? That single question absolutely obsessed one of science fiction's most legendary and, frankly, bewildering minds, Philip K. Dick. You see, his entire collection of stories wasn't just about spaceships and robots. It was one long, relentless investigation into the very fabric of reality itself.
And this quote? It's everything. For Philip K. Dick, or PKD as fans call him, this wasn't just a clever starting point for a story. It was the philosophical engine that drove his entire career. He looked around and saw a world just being flooded with fakes, with these manufactured realities, and he made it his life's mission to figure out what, if anything, was actually genuinely real.
So here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to start with that central question, and then we're going to follow the path he took, exploring the increasingly bizarre and honestly terrifying answers his books came up with. We'll go from political lies to physical decay and end up in a full-blown cosmic prison. It's quite a ride.
All right, so first up, what is real? The central question. And this is where PKD lets us in on his little secret. He said his job was to create universes. But the trick was, he liked to build universes that were designed to crumble. For him, reality falling apart wasn't some kind of mistake in the story. No, that was the story. The moment things start to unravel is the moment his real exploration begins. Okay, so his first big answer, and this one might hit a little close to home today, is that the universe is basically a lie. A construct that's designed for one purpose, to control us. So just think about this for a second. What if everything around you, the whole world you see, is just a complete fake? The news that shapes how you think, the leaders you follow, maybe even the quiet town you live in, what if it's all just an elaborate stage play? To get at this, PKD used this really powerful, kind of creepy concept, the simulacrum. So, a simulacrum. What is that? Well, it's a copy of something that doesn't have an original anymore. It's an image that's totally disconnected from any real source. Take his very first novel, Solar Lottery. There's this celebrated leader, and people are moved by his profound speeches, but the words aren't coming from him. They're coming from a pre-programmed, withered image. The copy has completely replaced the real thing.
And this is where the idea gets really dangerous politically. In his book, The Penultimate Truth, most of the human race is living underground, working tirelessly in factories to support a massive war effort they only ever see on TV. But get this, the war is a lie. It's a TV show, a fiction cooked up by the elites who are living it up on the surface. The manufactured reality has become the perfect prison.
And I mean, this theme is just everywhere in his work. The US president turns out to be a robot. A whole peaceful town is just a mental construct to keep one guy from finding out a secret. An antique is only real because it has a certificate of authenticity. But then you have to ask, is the certificate itself real? It's just endless.
All right, so if our human worlds are just a bunch of lies, what's actually real underneath it all? Well, PKD's next answer is pretty dark. He says the only objective thing is entropy, the inevitable slide of everything into total decay and rubbish.
You know, entropy is this idea from physics. Basically, everything in the universe is always moving from order to disorder. It's always, slowly, falling apart. For PKD, this wasn't just a science lesson. It was the fundamental truth of everything. Behind all our grand stories and fake worlds, the universe is just quietly, relentlessly turning to junk.
And you know what he thought was speeding this whole process up? Modern consumer culture. Things like planned obsolescence, making products that are designed to break so you have to buy new ones. He saw this endless cycle of making and throwing away, not as progress, but as a system built to accelerate decay, creating what academics call a vast piling up of waste until nothing has any real meaning left.
This quote from the artist Robert Smithson, which often comes up when analyzing Dick's work, just nails this feeling perfectly. For PKD, the future isn't some gleaming utopia. It's already lost, buried somewhere in the garbage heaps of our own past. The only real thing is the trash.
Okay, so we've had politics, we've had physics, and now things are about to get really, really weird. Moving beyond all that, PKD's final answer became theological. He started to believe, quite literally, that our reality is a prison built by a mad god.
And look, this wasn't just some plot device for a new book. After he had these intense, mystical experiences back in 1974, he spent the rest of his life writing this thing, the Exegesis. It's this massive 8,000-page journal where he was desperately trying to make sense of what he saw. He was building a genuine belief system to explain the fake world he was convinced we all live in.
And what he came up with drew from these ancient mystical ideas called Gnosticism. The basic idea is this: the God who created our world is insane. So this world we see, it's a fake, a counterfeit. We're trapped inside it, completely deceived. But, and this is the key, there's a true good God on the outside who's trying to send us messages, trying to wake us up from the nightmare.
He even came up with names for these two realities. Our prison world, he called that the artifact. Think of it like a computer simulation running on cruel, glitchy code. But behind it, he believed there was the Urgrund, the primal ground of being. That's the real deal, the true reality that's hiding in the background, trying to shatter the illusion of the artifact.
So, let's recap. You're living in a world that is a lie, that's turning into a trash heap, and is actually a cosmic prison run by a madman. So, what are you supposed to do about it? Well, for PKD, the answer is simple. You rebel.
And this is where suffering actually finds a purpose. In PKD's wild system, pain isn't just random or meaningless. No, it's the prison's alarm system. It's the very thing that forces you to wake up and ask, hey, wait a minute, what is really going on here? The people who are comfortable in the fake world have no reason to question it. It's the ones who suffer who start looking for the exit.
So the path to freedom, according to him, is this kind of internal rebellion. It's a process. First, you have to disobey the rules of the fake world. Then, you deny that it's even real. That leads to the death of your individual ego, because your ego is tied to the prison, and only then can the Urgond, the true reality, finally be born inside you. It's basically a spiritual jailbreak.
Ultimately, he puts all the responsibility right back on our shoulders. We're not just supposed to passively adapt to this strange, hostile universe. Our job is to actively transform it into something meaningful, something we recognize. The truth isn't something you just find, it's something you help create.
So in the end, for Philip K. Dick, it wasn't really about finding some single, tidy answer to the question, what is real? The real value, the whole point of his life's work was in the struggle itself. To question everything, to disobey, and to keep searching for something authentic in a universe of fakes. That's the real meaning.
Which of course leaves us with one last, very personal question. In a world that feels increasingly full of fakes, a world PKD would probably find all too familiar, if the first step to freedom is to disobey reality, where do you even begin?